and the main Bible verses will be based on 1 Timothy 4:12. Paul is writing to young evangelist Timothy, and then he tells him, "Let no one despise your youth, or let no one look down on you because you are young." So, even back then there was danger in people looking down on young people and then, saying, "No, you're too small to do something for God." And in today's preaching, today's lesson, I want to illustrate how God used young people to carry out His purposes, and then point out what kind of young people God can use, and also remind the older generation how we need to treat the younger generation. So, number one, on that note, I'll grab one for myself. It would be how God used the young people. So, the first one is He used to save. The first one is to save, letter A, to save Israel in time of famine. We go through Joseph. We're reading Bible at home right now, and we're reading the book of Genesis, and then the story about Joseph. And then through Joseph, God provided Israel and the whole family how to survive in the bad times, the 7 years. And then he was 17 years old when that thing happened, when he became a slave, and he was sold to Egypt. And then it says, Genesis 37:2, it says, this is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending flocks with his brothers. He was 17 years old, he was sold to slavery, and he was used by God. So at 17, God can use you. Next one is, number B, is to deliver Israelites from Philistines. And then we just saw where that happened. David and Goliath story. And then in the 1 Samuel 17:33 it says, Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man." And then he has been a warrior all his youth. So he's saying, "Hey, who are you? You're just a little boy here. You're not going to go out and fight the little giant." I think he was like 9 feet tall, about 3 meters or so. And we saw the place where that happened and the stones that he took. God used that little boy David, and then he defeated Philistines, and then they had a great victory. Next one is, I'm just going to list of who God can use, the young people. Next one is to lead Israel to its greatest height. So David appointed Solomon to be his next king of Israel. And then when he became king, this is what Solomon, this is what he said. 1 King 3:7, it says, "Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child, and you do not know, and I do not know how to carry out my duties." So when Solomon became a king, it says, "I'm just a little child," and he asked for God's wisdom, and it says, "Ask and it shall be given unto you." And so God gave what he wanted. He gave him wisdom, power, and then lots of riches, and we know the story about him. D, a letter D on your notes, you guys following? It says to restore Judah to the true worship of God. When he was 8, Josiah, he was 8 years old. My little boy is almost 8 soon. He was 8 and he was a king. Can you guys imagine that our president, like 8-year-old boy, walking around, president of the United States? And he was a good king. 2 Chronicles 34:1, it says, Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. He did what is right in the eyes of the Lord, and he followed the ways of his father David, not turning aside to the right or left. So he was 8 and he was following God, and he was doing what his great father David did. When he was 16, he sought to serve God. 2 Chronicles 34:3 says, in the 8th year of his reign, while he was still young, now he was 8, now he's 16, the same guy. he became to seek God of his father David. In his 12th years, he began to approach Judah and Jerusalem and places, and then he got rid of all the idols at that time. And he was 16, so he was a teenager. So when people tell me right now that teenagers can't do anything, that's wrong. And by 26, he instituted religious reforms, and when he was 26, they did the Passover, and they did a lot of good stuff at that time. And God was with him, and then he didn't have lots of wars at that time. Letter E says, God used little guys or teenagers to prophesy to nations. Do you guys know the story of Jeremiah when he was a little boy? It says in Jeremiah 1:4-6, it says, "The Lord spoke to me his word, saying, Before I made you in your mother's womb, I chose you. Before you were born, I set you apart for special work. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Then I said, But Lord God, I do not know how to speak. I'm only a boy." This is the New Century Version translation. It says, I'm only youth, I'm still young. So he was still young at that time when God told him he has to go out and speak, and then speak to the nations. Letter F on this note, God's using young people to reveal the greatness of God to other nations. And then he did it through Daniel. Do you guys remember the story of Daniel and how they went to captivity to a different nation? And then I think he was like 12 or 15 years old when that happened with the friends. And then all this story, how they were faithful, away from their family, away from their parents, away from the place where they grew up. And then in Daniel chapter 1, verse 18, we already see that he was around 15 or 18 years old. 15, still in high school, 18, just graduating high school. He was already counselor to the king. So he was already with the king, he was serving him, and then he was talking about his God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. G, it says, God used the young people to bring the Savior into the world through Mary. Mary was a virgin. And according to the studies, they think she was in her late teens. She was a teenager when that happened. So God used her to bring the Savior into the world. Letter H, and that's the last one for the God's using people, would be to proclaim the gospel to the lost. And I'm referring to Timothy. When Paul selected him to join him on a journey, he was with him, traveling with the Apostle Paul. And then he must have even been really young, because for over 20 years, and then later Paul tells him, let no one despise your youth. So he was really young when he started to traveling with Apostle Paul, and then he was with him, and then he took that ministry, and then he was serving God, and I think he was a pastor in one of the churches. So this is the evidence how God used young people, 8-year-old, 15-year-old, 19-year-old, and God used them for His glory. So now I want to talk about what kind of people God can use. So the kind of people God can use for His glory. A, those who are willing to flee immorality. And then back to the story of Joseph. Do you guys remember that when that happened? When it was easy for him to fall for the trap, he says, no, I'm not going to do that. And then also the other example is Timothy. Paul instructed him to 2 Timothy 2:22. It says, "But run away from evil desires of youth. Try hard to live right, to have faith, love, and peace, together with those who trust in the Lord from pure hearts." When we keep our bodies pure, when we keep our mind pure, we can be used for God's glory. B, letter B, on the note here, God can use people who are willing to trust in the Lord. Like David, who was fighting the Goliath, he was trusting the Lord. And then he later proclaimed, 2 Samuel 22:31, it says, "The ways of God are without fault. The Lord's word is pure. He is shield to those who trust Him." So if you trust the Lord, God can use you to defeat the giants in your life. You guys following up with the notes here? C, those who are willing to seek Him with humility. When we humble ourselves before the Lord, when we seek His face, and then back to Josiah when he was 8 years old when that happened, and he was seeking the Lord. And then later on, God blessed him when he was a good king and one of the best kings in his time. So D is those who are willing to seek the Lord with humility. Letter E on the note here, those who are willing to boldly do God's will. You know, God can tell you to do something, but if we're not following His commandments or we're not following what He wants from us, we're not going to be used by Him. So, as Jeremiah did through when God told him what to do, and then it says in Jeremiah 7:1, it says, "This is the word that the Lord spoke to Jeremiah. Stand at the gate of the temple and preach the message there. Hear the word of the Lord, all you people of the nations of Judah, all you who come through these gates to worship the Lord, listen to this message." He actually went out and did that. God told him to do, he followed Him, and this is whom God can use. Letter F on the notes here says, those who are willing to be true to their God. As Daniel, he refused to compromise. He could have just ate, president's food. They put all the best food up there. I'm sure they had pork in it as well. But all the wine and everything else that the king himself drank, they ate too. But he says, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to eat what we can. So then they did an experiment for 10 days. We know the story. So Daniel was true to God and to his beliefs. And as a result, he found God's favor. And it says, God made the chief officer, and then basically he became, again, advisor to the king, to many kings, through many kings that were there at that time. So letter G, it says, those who are willing to humbly submit to God's will. As Mary accepted the promise that God's angel came and says, you're going to have a baby, and this baby will be special. And this is what she said. It says, I'm the servant of the Lord. Let this happen to me as you say. She took that inside of her. She believed it, and she said, I'm your servant, and let this happen to me as you say. The last one here, it says, letter H, those willing to be an example to others. Those willing to be an example to others. And example in this world, in the word that Paul told Timothy, going back to our original verse that I talked about in 1 Timothy 4:12, it says, set an example in what? In word. Set an example in style. 1 Timothy 4:12 through 16. In style, in love, in spirit, in faith, and in purity. For then, it says then, can not only save themselves, but also others. So when we do that, we save ourselves and we also save others. When we follow that. So certainly God can use young people for His glory, like He used Joseph, like He used David, like He used other people. And then we who are older, I guess I'm kind of consider myself a little bit older now, so we also have to be encouraging to them. And not just look down on them, oh, you're just a little kid. So the third part is our responsibility to the young people. So number 3, the third section. So our responsibility is to receive them as they are. As Jesus emphasized, when the young children were brought to Him, He says, let them come to me. He didn't reject them. It was babies, the mothers brought them for the prayer, and Jesus can touch them. He took them and He blessed them. So when we bring our children, when they're born, we come here, we bless them from their young ages, and then we hope that they're going to be serving the Lord until the last day. So we need to receive them, is the first one. Number 2, it says, do not place stumbling blocks in their way. So if they're trying to do something, if they're trying to do something here or there or here, or they're trying to preach, or they're trying to do something up there, we should not be putting blocks in their way. And then, instead we should be careful, and then we should guide them and say, good job, this is how we should do it, and if you need to help, we can always help. And then we should also encourage them, because it says in Matthew 18:10 says, be careful, do not think these little children are worth nothing. So God says, even little kids, they're something, they're precious to Him. Number 3, we need to encourage Him. The little kids, the teenagers, a few people are out for a few different reasons, but we need to encourage them. If they're not here, we need to call them as adults, say, hey, I haven't seen you today, maybe something's going on, let me pray for you. So we need to encourage them. If they're not here, if they're here doing something, we can encourage them to do better, and then thank them for what they're doing in the church or outside as well. The last one is D, do not look down on them. As Paul advised to the church, 1 Corinthians 16:11. 1 Corinthians 16:11 says, so none of you should treat Timothy as unimportant, but help him on his trip so in his peace, so he can come back to me. So he was telling the church in Corinth, so they can be nice to him, and he shouldn't consider him unimportant, Timothy, because he was still young at that time. So what I want to say in the end, God can use little children, God can use youth, God can use adults, God can use the older generation. It's just how we take it and how we do we take His will in our life or not. And then we need to make sure we remember all these examples, what kind of person you have to be. If you guys are still consider yourselves young, what do you need to be in order to be used for God's glory? Like it was David, it was Jeremiah, like it was Joseph, and all the other people. So make sure you go over the notes and remember how they lived their life and what they did, and then how God used them. And then those of us who are older right now, we should encourage them. We should, say good job. We should say this is how to do it, and then don't put blocks, any sticks in what they're doing. If they're trying to do their best, we need to just encourage them to do better, and we're always there to help them. Do we agree to that? All of you guys who speak English, and then those of you who speak Russian, and then getting the translation at the moment. We should be helping them, and then hopefully we can be one big church, different families. We can grow together, and we can help each other, and then have that fellowship in our faith and in our deeds, so we can work together for the glory of God. So that's all I had to say. Hopefully you guys took something out of this preach. If you're young, hopefully you know how to behave, what to do in your life. And if we're older, we need to remember that. We need to remember that kids can be also used for God's glory.